Hi. Hello. Hello. Hey, if we could, since we're being live streamed, we've got a couple of members who are trying to make it through traffic, but we're going to go ahead and get started. And Brian is bringing a sign-up sheet for anybody who wants to sign up. We got Representative Park and Kennard are on their way. They said it'd be a couple of minutes late. So I'm going to ask, push your button there, 4-Leader Bonner. I'm going to let you open us in prayer.
All right, let's pray. Heavenly Father, thank you so much for today. Thank you for this time together to consider these important issues. We just pray for wisdom and discernment as we work through these things and pray that we make the best decisions for our constituents in the state of Georgia. In your name we pray. Amen.
Thanks, sir. I'm not going to talk because I'm here to listen just like you are, but I do have two comments to make. Number one, this is not a United States congressional hearing, meaning they come up with an outcome and then they bring the people to prove their point. This is the opposite. We're here to learn and to see if our minds can be changed and to figure out. And with that, I've used this a lot, and it's a verse out of the Bible. And even if you don't subscribe to the Bible, you can't deny this is truth. This is Proverbs 18:17. The first to state his case seems right until another comes and cross-examines him. That's not intended to either side. It's intended to both sides. So if you came in here bent on we need to index, please be open-minded to hear the other side. If you're bent on we don't need to index, please try to I guess what I'm saying, try to seek to to understand, not to be understood. Okay, so with that, we'll have Vice Chairman Kirby, since it was his bill, lead us off.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. We all know this is an issue that has a lot of moving parts. There's going to be a lot of things that can come up and talk about and how we do this. And the one thing I'd ask the presenters today is to answer the question, why do we do it the way we do it? I don't care if we're the only state that does it one way or the other. If it's what's right for Georgia, that's what we want to do. But if you don't know why we do it, I don't know how you argue for or against it. You know, it's like, I like it this way. Well, why? I don't know. We've always done it that way. Your knowledge is not adequate. Or, I don't like it this way. We should change. Well, why? Do we do it this way? Well, I don't know. Well, then your knowledge is still inadequate. I understand there's some points to be made on changing it or keeping it, but if you don't know why it is the way it is, I'm not sure what you're going to bring to us today. We can talk about claims experience modifiers and different things like that on how rates are done. I did a lot of work fortunate to be with a big corporation, has manufacturing facilities all over the country. The VP and I had to sit down and we looked at comp premiums between our plant in Monroe, Georgia, and our one in Sterling, Illinois. And Illinois has a very high TTD payment. We're very comparable in size, comparable in a lot of things. We have the same premium. Why? Because we have basically the same number of comp claims a year, the same incident rates, same DART rates. That affects our premiums more than any one benefit. And we were able to look at this all over the country with the hundreds of plants that we have, small ones and larger ones. So there's a lot to this. There's a lot, and there's different things different states do. They pay more, but they don't pay as long. They pay less, but they pay longer. So this committee, what we're wanting to do is find out why we're doing it the way we do it. Is this the way it's best for Georgia? And make hopefully good decisions going forward. So other than that, Mr. Chairman, I'll turn it over to the people who want to speak and hear what they got to say.
Okay. Anybody want to volunteer to go first, or you want me to go down the list? I see somebody standing up. Let's, so everyone, I think I know everybody in the room, but for the sake of media and presentation, when you come, please identify yourself by name and who you're representing, whether it's an organization, company, and then when you get done, the committee members will have an opportunity to ask you questions. And even if you don't sign up, I'm going to give everybody who wants to speak an opportunity to say something, so don't panic if you don't sign up.
Real quick.
No, you're,
I'm thrilled by that.
1 second.
go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, I agree with you. I want to hear everybody has an opportunity to speak. I do have an eye appointment at 1:30 in Monroe I have to make, so
Okay.
we are till 12:30 at least. I'll be here.
Well, if we're still here at 1:30, I don't know who's going to be running this, but, all right.
That's completely fair. My name is Sarah Stottlemyre. Thank you, Mr. Chairman and committee members, for having us here today to speak with us about indexing. I am the current president of the Workers' Comp Claimants Lawyers Association. I have been practicing workers' compensation for over 15 years on both the claimant side and the defense side. I'm here to testify today about why we need indexing for the state of Georgia, which is a huge time and resource waste to fight over this every single year. We know you all don't enjoy it. We know you don't enjoy seeing our smiling faces here time after time again. We know that you have other things that you would rather be spending your time on with your limited time and resources. And we know Chairman Vincent also doesn't like having to deal with this political football session after session. So why are we here today? There was a gentleman's agreement in AC on legislative to raise the max TTD rate to 2/3 of the state's average weekly wage each year. Everyone agrees. My law partner serves on the legislative committee. My other attorney in my firm is the chairman of the Rules Committee for Advisory. We speak about this stuff ad nauseum pretty much daily. I'm just going to do a really quick, brief explanation of what TTD and AWW is, because I think we go into these things very rapidly, and I think a lot of people hear some of these acronyms and have no idea what it even means. So TTD stands for Temporary Total Disability Benefits. It is what injured worker gets paid when they're completely disabled. It's based on the average weekly wage at the time of their date of injury. It's calculated by the 13 weeks prior to their injury. So no going forward when people are talking about TTD and AWW, that's what they're speaking about. Last year in legislative on AC, there was an agreement to raise the TTD rate to $100. And to be honest, we wouldn't actually be here today had that gone through. It only went up $50 instead, despite the AC Legislative Committee agreeing to the $100, which is only 59% of the state's average weekly wage. So even when the advisory process works as it is supposed to, it often falls short of what its key goals are. So even though all sides agree, and it is true that all sides agree as far as a gentleman's agreement in legislative AC that we should keep the TTD rate at 2/3 of the average weekly wage for the state of Georgia, that continues to fall short. For the last 3 years, there was no legislative package coming out of legislative AC. What that means is there is no increase in TTD during those time periods. Then prior to that, there was a bump of $100, because prior to that, there was another 3-year gap. So the years that we are able to get a legislative package out of legislative AC, we generally are able to get an increase. Unfortunately, that falls significantly short to tying it to the 2/3 of the average weekly wage. Failure to understand what indexing the max comp rate actually does. So I think a lot of times when people hear that we're looking for a bump in the comp rate, everybody thinks that the entire system is going to get a lovely bump in the comp rate and then the system is going to collapse. That's simply not true. Your TTD rate is established on the day of your injury, period. It's currently 2/3 of your average weekly wage at the time of your accident, or a max of $7.25 per week. This only affects the highest wage earners when we're talking about indexing the rate, because it's only those skilled workers, a lot of them are union guys, that are making that rate, which would actually correspond to the highest TTD rate. Those same workers are the ones who are used to making significantly more than in their regular jobs prior to getting injured. Those workers are the ones who have zero inclination to stay in the system, because nobody can afford to stay in the system earning that weekly rate when they're used to earning significantly more. If they stay in the system for a long time, it's truly because they're seriously injured. I have lots of clients who have lost cars and mortgage payments and arrested from being able to pay child support. It's horrendous for those highly skilled workers when they can't actually meet their bills after they've suffered a work-related injury. So even though it only affects those highest wage earners, that when we're talking about indexing, think of a very small subset of the injured workers in Georgia, they only get it for a finite period of time. So once they get a light duty work release from their authorized treating physician, in 1 year, their benefits get reduced another 2/3. I'm going to give you a quick example of a client that's one of my favorite guys. His name's Brian. He was working as a set constructor on Black Panther. He fell through glass flooring, ended up going 10 feet down onto concrete. He's had 2 failed shoulder surgeries, 2 failed back surgeries, and a hip replacement. He has a 9th grade education. At the time of his injury, he was earning $1,622 per week. So we'll just say $1,600 a week, right? Since he's been in the system so long and he received a light duty work release, now to be honest, nobody's going to want Brian answering their phones at their office. So, I mean, it's kind of a way to just reduce his benefits. He's now earning $383 per week. So instead of having $6,500 a month to live on for his family, to pay his bills, to pay his mortgage, he's now living off of $1,500 a month. So even though we talk about raising the highest amount for those wage earners to just index it to 2/3, those highest wage earners, once they get a light duty work release, you're only entitled to those benefits for 1 more year, and then it goes down 2/3 of that amount again, okay? So this is, again, for a very finite period of time. How is a Georgia worker who's used to making $6,500 a month supposed to live off of $1,500 a month for their family if they're unable to go back to work? Simply put, they can't. With the current condition of our economic state in our country right now, with inflation so high, it especially hits these workers hard. I think another misconception that a lot of people think is that, again, everybody's going to get a comp bump if we go to indexing. Couldn't be more thrilled for my clients if that actually happened. Unfortunately, it does not affect anyone currently in the system right now, okay? I have a client who got hurt in 2001 where he lost half of his leg in a bush hog accident. He's still earning $225 per week because that was the max comp rate at that time, despite all of these increases. So even if people are in the system, even if they're catastrophically injured, they are not going to get any raise whatsoever in the TTD rate because we decided to index. So it's not like everyone's going to get a huge bump and the whole system's going to collapse. You may also be asking, how does this actually affect the workers' comp insurance companies, right? I mean, that's probably a concern for a lot of people. Well, 48 other states, Indiana is the only other one besides Georgia that does an index, but Indiana's legislature automatically sets the TTD rate with 2/3, actually I think it's 79% of their average weekly wage every single session, so it's basically indexed to a point. 40 other states do it. The insurance companies are just fine. In fact, NCCI did a study in October of 2021 showing that an increase of $100 per week would do, and it only showed a 3.2 increased cost impact to the system. Now that was with some other variables thrown in, which was showing about how injured workers may want to stay in the system longer, so they actually inflated that number a little bit more. But remember, there was no legislative package, no TTD increase for the 3 years prior to this time that we got this $50 bump. So if you're averaging it out at a less than 1% increase every year for these insurance companies, it's not a earth-ending cataclysmic event for them. I also am a small business owner. I've got several employees in my law firm. Every year, even though we didn't get a bump in the TTD rate, they continue to audit my wages that I pay my employees. I get calls from the Hartford, and they're like, hey, we need to go through all of your stuff to see if we're charging you the proper premiums. And usually they come back and increase my premiums. So it's not that they have not, or that they are going to be out a bunch of money for this. They've already collected the premiums for the higher wages that we pay our employees. Jeff Stinson's article in the Fulton County Daily Report, who is a law partner of Mr. Potter, stated, because a majority of cases do not result in injured workers getting benefits for the maximum period of time, the change is not likely to have a large impact. Additionally, he stated, in my experience, most claimants are earning less than the maximum rate already. This was an article that came out right after we got the $50 bump when it should have been the $100. Again, this is Mr. Potter's law partner writing for the Fulton County Daily Report because they were kind of trying to discuss what the effects were going to be on the insurance companies. I do believe that the advisory process is a beneficial system for both sides at times. We have a lot of debate in all of our committees over medical treatment, panels of physicians, MMI being thrown out. I mean, all of these things that we constantly fight about. I mean, every single year we do lists and we say, these are our goals for the year. And then we literally battle it out in there to try and get those things accomplished and to trying to come up with some compromise. It's great debate. It's very beneficial to have shareholders from all sides attending. However, the difference here is that we all already agree that it should be 2/3 of the state's average weekly wage. So all it really becomes is codifying a gentleman's agreement and not missing those years that we don't have a legislative package. We've agreed upon it already. Everybody has made concessions to get that done. And the fact that it's become such a hot button issue when it's literally codifying something that is already in place is a little bit bizarre. Don't forget, too, that as I don't know if you all have been listening to The Economist lately, but there's a chance that there's a pretty strong recession coming our way. We are going to be tied to that indexing if it goes, which means it will go down. And the claimants bar and injured workers, they will receive, the claimants bar will be behind that because that's what we fought for. So it really comes down to hell or high water. We're tied to that indexing, recession or a boom. And that's okay. So it's really time for Georgia to just join the rest of the nation in trying to get something done for our highest wage earners, because right now they're being failed in the system.
Any questions? Mr. Kirby.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You kind of cruised over it real quick just in one statement, but you did bring up MMI.
Yes.
And MMI has no bearing on suspension of benefits. Now, from my side of the table, that makes no sense at all. If they were at MMI, and why is that not an effect on our continuing indemnity benefits?
No, so it is an effect on the continuation of benefits. I think that MMI is a kind of word that's used as a little bit of a boogeyman, right? It's used to scare kind of, okay, well then we're going to get MMI. For example, in South Carolina, you have maximum medical improvement.
Excuse me, why don't you tell everyone what MMI
Okay,
is?
sorry. And I apologize. So, MMI is maximum medical improvement. In some states, you can actually, once a claimant, even though they're unable to return to work, if they get at maximum medical improvement, therefore a doctor says nothing else is going to make them better, right? They can suspend benefits. However, to give an example, in South Carolina, you have to request a hearing to then suspend those benefits. Your hearing will be held in 60 days. Then the plaintiff's attorney can send him to another doctor. If you have a pain doctor that says, I think that his back can be improved with radio frequency ablations or injections or something along that nature, then they are not going to suspend his benefits yet. So it goes to a trial. It doesn't automatically just, you get the note from the doctor, your benefits are done. They have to request a hearing, then there's an adjudication of it. Additionally, let's say the judge says, okay, I do think he is at MMI, right? So here we have what's called permanent impairment ratings for basically if I broke my arm and the bone healed, I put a cast on it, the bone healed and went right back, right? My body has not changed that much. But if I broke my arm and the bone went through all of the muscle and the skin and I had to have steel plates in, I would be given a permanent impairment rating because that's how my body has physically changed as a result of my injury. So in South Carolina, the judge can look at what the doctor says. Say the doctor says, all right, Sarah broke her arm, 15% permanent impairment rating. The judge will say, well, Sarah has a 9th grade education. Sarah has been working unloading trucks now for 40 years. So now she's obviously not going to be able to do that job. We're going to give her a 50% permanent impairment rating. So it's based on the totality of the circumstances. So while actual MMI is kind of the boogeyman to throw out, there's a lot of states that have it, and the settlements for the injured workers are significantly higher than the settlements in Georgia, and it's for those reasons. So would I like MMI to be brought to Georgia? Absolutely not. That being said, it's not as earth-ending as it sounds.
All right, thank you.
Yes.
Okay. Is that Representative McLean?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, I mean, I guess my only concern is that I hear all of this and I want to hear more, but and I guess my question is that, you know, we didn't say anything about federal, but we talk about federal. When I say that, you know, we don't pay $5.15 in our minimum wage in Georgia, $5.15. We do try to go to the federal, which is $7.25. Mm-hmm. So where are we compared to the federal in Georgia? I mean, is that a question? I mean, I don't know. So what is federal's payment?
Their average weekly wage?
Yes.
I have no idea.
Yeah, I don't think it's a state issue. So it's.
I wish that I could tell you. Do you know what it is? No. It's higher. But I don't know.
I mean, the
what it
reason I brought it up was because, you know, Mr. Chairman, is that our minimum wage in Georgia is $5.15. A lot of folks don't know that.
I know, but it's doesn't matter since it's overridden. In this case, since workers' comp is based on the rate comes from the Georgia Department of Labor, which lags by year. So it's based on wages, not. So minimum wage is irrelevant, I guess, is what I'm
Right.
saying.
I mean, I hear you, but I'm just still trying to say. But I know there's got to be a federal payment as well in TDD. Is it?
Don't think so. No, it's
okay.
just state law.
Hey, I just. You know,
Okay,
like
but
that.
great question.
I wanted to break it up.
Yeah.
You know.
Okay.
Yeah. No, I mean, it's a good question. As
They told me it's not. I don't know.
no, I don't know. So I'm not sure about it. But you know, Zach is going to be speaking, but he's brought an amazing demonstrative evidence thing here. I don't know if you all can see it, but it shows. In my portion, I really didn't want to get into the numbers because I actually personally hate numbers.
We'll let him do that. But
Yeah.
we've got a question down here. Is it?
28.
Okay, Mr. Holly.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I was just kind of curious for the TTD rate being at about 59%, and you said that yet for the last time, so bump was only about $100. Has it been written in the statute for that particular 59% formula to be there so that it locks it in? It's not
No.
there. Okay.
No, so that's not in there. So basically, again, every year in legislative AC, they get together, there's a gentleman's agreement, and they try and keep it at 2/3 of the state's average weekly wage. That's why it was agreed that it was $100 when it came out of there, but it got lowered to $50 for whatever reason it was. It's currently at the 59.9%, but it can go up or down. I think to bring it back up, we would need $87 or something like that for it to fall back in line.
Okay.
Did Mr. Potter want to go? I'm signed up, but I don't want to have us hog everything and then have Mr. Potter.
Yeah, do we want to ping pong this thing or let them keep rolling? Okay.
Okay.
Either Ashley or Zach, y'all, who wants to come up?
Thank you all for listening.
Thank you, Sarah. Okay. Ashley, tell us who you are. Yes.
Good morning.
Morning.
My name is Ashley Abercrombie. I'm the Director of the Property and Casualty Programs for the Association County Commissioners of Georgia. And I also sit on the board of the Georgia Workers' Compensation Association and the Group Funds Association, which represents 400 plus employers, large and small employers for GWCA, and then also about 150,000 employees for the group self-insured programs such as ours at ACCG. So I'm here speaking on their behalf today. Not all of those members have signed on because of time and maybe because of opinion, but we do have several that are on that list, as well as something that was written on behalf of our group, collectively expressing our concern with indexing. Just want to remind everybody the purpose of indemnity benefits is to provide just a temporary substitute for their income while they're receiving medical treatment, with the whole goal of getting those employees back to work. And so, I wasn't around when the original numbers were set for the rate, the maximum indemnity rate. But I feel like the purpose is probably, it's not. We wanted to make sure it's an encouragement for that employee to get back to work, but also provide them with some, obviously, some income to help them, while they're healing. We believe that the current method of periodically increasing the maximum weekly work comp income benefit, that it's bode well for Georgia. It allows a fair amount of give and take between the employers and the employees. And has been a well-intended process through the advisory council to come up what that number ought to be on a periodic basis. So while indexing sounds good and it is very well-intended in the world that we're living in today, we think that linking automatic increases to the maximum benefit, it ignores reality, which, as we know, is pretty complex. We are in the most complex world that I've lived in my years, due to COVID, due to the inflation, recession, rumors of wars, and foreign competition, et cetera. So we really feel like it's a better thing that should be discussed and not just put on autopilot. And that's been the purpose, as I understand it, for having these discussions periodically and just trying to make sure that we take everything into account. So it was already mentioned about, with indexing, we feel like there would need to be some countermeasures taken to kind of balance raising that maximum number. And one of those, as mentioned before, is the automatic termination of disability, so that when they reach MMI, then the benefits would be cut off, as they are in other southeastern states that do index currently. And as mentioned right now, our benefits, MMI has no bearing on the benefits that we pay here in Georgia. And also pure subrogation is mentioned in that handout that I provided. So in most other southeastern states that have indexing, the payer would receive a full recovery less fees and the remainder to the plaintiff, whereas in Georgia, the plaintiff is made whole if there is subrogation opportunity. So they get more benefits that way, the way that we currently have it here in Georgia. Also with indexing in other states, they have an employer-only selection sometimes of medical providers. And in Georgia, we have what's called a panel of physicians. So the employer has input on who those doctors would be, up to 6 different options for the employee, but the employee has the ability to choose from that list of 6. So those are just a few reasons. This group believes that a periodic, healthy, and constructive dialogue around the rate adjustments by Georgia stakeholders, as has been done in the past, is beneficial. We feel like it's helped Georgia to maintain a healthy environment for businesses as well as employees, and that we believe it's just a more thoughtful, prudent approach to take it periodically and discuss all the factors that are in play, and versus having a set it and forget it kind of approach. So those are my comments on behalf of our group, and again, we appreciate the opportunity to weigh in.
Any questions? Representative Park?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So did you say that you're from ACCG?
Yes, sir.
So in terms of the counties, could you speak a little more as to how indexing would potentially increase the cost to counties?
Well, like the lady before me said, I mean, most of the claims that we have, the max doesn't really even come into play.
One more question, if I may.
Mm-hmm.
You mentioned that the current system is fair to both sides. Could you speak a little more as to how that would be fair to workers if they would otherwise be paid more where they're currently not, and especially for employers in the midst of a recession, if the amount will go down if it's indexed, how employers paying more in a recession would be fair to employers?
I think being able to have a set rate, like she mentioned before with recession, then potentially the number would go down. So having a particular rate that's set for a while, then you would have more stability, I would think, in your payments. And the indexing part of it, that there's a little bit of give and take, obviously, that if you put indexing in place, then to have other things that would come into play that would benefit the employers, because they're obviously paying a little bit more for those individuals that make more, then it would kind of help weigh that out to have some of these other things put in place, like MMI, for example.
And last question, just to clarify, so it is the formal position of ACCG that they would be opposed to indexing?
Yes, we have signed on to that letter as well. Okay. Yes, sir.
Thank
and
you.
It's more an analysis, I guess, of all components. Not just honing in on that particular thing with indexing, but taking a bigger picture look at what's going on.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Thanks.
Representative Holly? Wait, Ashley, come back up. It's one of the privileges of speaking. You get to answer questions.
I'm sorry, I thought I was doing.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. All right, let me ask you these 20 questions real quick. Just real quick, I know when you were explaining that you believe that the system works because the changes, the updates are periodic. Mm-hmm. In what way do you believe that it's necessary for that periodic adjustment to take place, rather than having it where it's fixed and locked in?
I believe in the advisory council getting together and having these discussions so that they are weighing in on all of the things that are going on at that particular time in the environment we're living in.
And just a follow-up,
Mm-hmm.
If it is locked in, just to kind of set a base standard, the advisory council, does that preclude them from being able to meet again to adjust it and inform us legislators so that we can kind of amend it then?
No, sir, I don't think so.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
And then Representative Kirby?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And you may not know this, our current at 725, that's not taxed. Now I know at our company, we keep their benefits intact for them as well. We take care of the employee contribution. Everybody doesn't have to do that, but a lot of them do, I hope. But without the tax, that 725, if my math is right, ballpark's going to equate to $1,087 a week, which is somewhere in that $25 to $27 an hour range. Is that kind of way you all calculate that as well? Or have you looked at it?
It sounds reasonable to me, but
That's $1,000 a week
Right.
would be $25 a week on a 40-hour week. So we're talking about somebody making, if they're making more than $25, $27, they're going down. If they're under that, they're probably not hitting the max anyway, correct?
yes, sir, I believe so. Somebody can check the math for me.
And I'm just doing averages and ballpark, so
Yes, sir.
if I'm off, let me know, but, all right, thank you.
Okay.
That's all the questions.
Okay.
All right, Zach.
Hello, everyone. I'm Zach Hendon. I'm the immediate past president of the WCCL. I want to thank Chairman Werkheiser and Vice Chair Kirby for having this important meeting and letting us air this issue out. And I also am mindful that after I speak, there's others that are going to be coming behind me that may raise issues that I won't get to address. But if y'all have any questions about those, we would be happy to address any questions that are brought up from anything said after us. I think maybe the one place I want to start is maybe talking about the statute, because I appreciate the question you asked about the statute. So the way this works right now is that the statute says that the TTD rate, or that's the temporary total benefit rate, is now $725 a week. And that's the max rate. In other words, it's 2/3 of the average weekly wage for that particular worker to a max of $725 a week. So anytime that has to be changed, the legislature has to go in and say, okay, we're taking that statute away, and now it's going to be $825 a week, or whatever the number is. And it needs to be done every year, because there are adjustments that should be made every year. So in answer to your question, it is set in the statute right now what the particular number is. So in order for that to change, it's got to come back to y'all again for the statute. Sarah did a great job of explaining that answer about MMI, about why it's not in the other states. We've been threatened with MMI for many years now, but in the other states, there's lots of different ways that they handle MMI. But here's the thing that Georgia has that that no one's brought up yet, that no other state has, and they have Section 104. Okay, so the way this works is that you've got an average weekly wage, then the worker gets 2/3 of that average weekly wage to a max of $725 for dates of accident after July 1st. And then after if the worker is on light duty, for the way the statute's worded, if he's on light duty for 52 weeks, consecutive weeks, or 78 aggregate weeks, then that worker's benefit is cut by another 2/3. In a lot of ways, and it's unilateral. All the insurance company has to do is file a form, and it happens. And so when you've got a worker that's cut by 2/3, then cut by 2/3 again, that's pretty devastating to begin with. So in some ways, it might be worse than MMI. But anyway, I wanted to cover those things because that hadn't been asked yet. And the lady that was here just before me talked about other states having, like we have posted panel of physicians. Well, the posted panel of physicians, so the employer is supposed to post a panel, and the employer and insurance company, usually it's the insurance company, gets to choose all 6 physicians on that panel. And the way the rules are worded now, they can choose 6 physicians that are from, I won't name any, but an industrial clinic, and have 1 orthopedist if they want to, and that's a valid panel. So that's sort of a red herring. What we're here today to talk about is not all these other issues. I mean, they want to bring the other issues in as a collective whole. But if you look at it, every year, somehow, the comp rate, the max comp rate, would need to be tweaked. And so that's the only question is, what's the best way to tweak it, and how do we fairly tweak it? You know, y'all have got a lot on your platter. You've got foster care, you've got Second Amendment rights, you've got stuff that you deal with every year. This is not one of those things that needs to be on the legislative platter. If instead of having the statute where we say it's a specific number that caps at a specific number each year, if we had it and it said, all right, we're going to set this statute at the number everybody agrees with, and that's 2/3 of the average weekly wage, then you set it based on the Department of Labor numbers for what the average weekly wage is, and then every year it just self-adjusts. Y'all never have to worry about this issue again. And it self-adjusts fairly. It's fair to our side and it's fair to their side because it can, like I said, it's a recession, it can go down. I did prepare a model just to kind of show you what the other states do. And I did have it sitting up there, but it was a little tall.
You can move it back up if you want to.
Okay, can everybody see it, or is that?
We can't see the bottom.
Can't see the bottom. Let's see if I can do this without. So anyway, and so if you see the bottom 4 states that index are indexing at 2/3. So when you look at the national average, they're indexing at 2/3. You got 8 more that index between 70% and 91%. And then you got the rest of the states indexing between 100% and 200% of their statewide average weekly wage. Indiana is about 81 to 85%. And then Georgia, right now, this is after the bump that we just received in July. We just received a $50 bump. Georgia is at 59.6%. And the way that's figured, so the Department of Labor figures just came out for 2021. So we're already 6 months behind that. But the private sector average weekly wage for 2021 is $12.16. And so if you take the 725 divided by 12.16, that gives you the 59.6%. So, really, we've got a number that we had already agreed on, and that's 66 2/3%. So if that's not an issue, then there's no reason not to put that on automatic pilot and let the thing be indexed. The current system, and I'm a supporter of the chairman's advisory system, and but on this issue, it's not working, and it hasn't been working for some time. So for the last 6 years, as Sarah was going over, we've had 3 years where we had 0 benefits, and then we got a $100 bump back in 2019. And that caused a lot of turmoil on the insurance side because they're up in arms. How can you do $100? Well, if it would have been indexed, it would have been $33 per year. Nobody would have even noticed it. And you know what probably went up during those 3 years? Insurance premiums went up. And if you, I think if you ask the others here, I think they will admit that insurance companies for workers' comp are not hurting. They're making record profits, so especially compared to other lines of insurance. And so so we had that period of time, and then we've just had this next 3-year period of time where we received no increase. We fell further behind the average weekly wage. And then it came out of advisory committee that we were supposed to get a $100 bump to bring us up to it last year. And then it came out and we got 50. So that's why I think it should be put on automatic pilot. It takes that stress out of the system. It saves y'all time, and it's fair to the workers, and it's fair to the employer insurer, because if we have a recession, it goes down. So that's what I have.
Okay, you've got a couple of questions. But for them, let me ask you, this is a very broad, when we say indexing, we're not multiplying times like the CPI. We're talking about using the multiplier of the average weekly wage, correct?
Correct.
Because that's why you're using that $33 as opposed to multiplying it times a CPI or other number, correct?
Yes, you would be picking a figure, which the figure I think is agreed upon 66 2/3. You'd be picking that percentage,
Okay.
and then you would be multiplying it times some figure, and the figure that I think everybody's been using is the private sector average weekly wage that comes out of the Department of Labor.
Okay. All right, got a couple of questions. Representative Kirby.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As you got it explaining the process and how it drops down and everything, I know there's some in this room. No, I don't mind making things even more complicated at times. Should we look at a difference between catastrophic and non-catastrophic and how that's done? And when it's just what I would call more of a simple comp claim that in 5 or 6 weeks I expect them a full recovery back to work, that we do, one thing, but if it's going to be long-term, that we look at how we handle these catastrophics maybe different?
Well, so if the question relates to 104 and how the section 104 and how it's reduced, so on 104 does not apply to a claim that's deemed catastrophic or found catastrophic. So in other words, the max comp rate, or the comp rate's 2/3 of the average weekly wage, and 104 would drop it by another 2/3, but it doesn't apply to catastrophic cases.
Okay, maybe instead of saying catastrophic, I was just using that for an extremely long, drawn-out claim that's going to take a long time. Should we look at maybe we're not handling those right when the dropping of TTD benefits or not?
Well, I mean, we didn't come here today asking for 104 to be done away with. We're just focused on how do we best adjust that average weekly wage.
Okay.
And a comp rate, I mean.
Okay, Representative Kennard.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you for the presentation. So even if we were to adopt a 66.7% indexing rate, we would still remain one of the bottom 5 states in the nation with just that low threshold.
You would be tied for the bottom in the nation if you adopted 66.5. We're now below that at 59.6.
We're dead last.
Dead last.
Awesome.
Okay, that's all the questions.
I just don't know.
Mr. Barton. Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you. When you say it drops by 2/3, is it dropping to 2/3, or is it dropping another 2/3 from that number?
When section 104 is applied and the person's on light duty for 52 weeks, it drops by another 2/3.
Okay.
So it's 2/3 of 2/3.
Okay. Thank you. I just want clarity on that.
Sure. And there's no, Georgia doesn't, there's a lot of other issues. Georgia doesn't have COLAs. The injured worker that, like on a catastrophic case, injured worker that's injured in the year 2000 is still getting $325 a week. That doesn't go up. So on those claims, it's not like when we're saying 725 is the max, it's not like that person gets 725. It just never goes up.
Okay. Thanks.
Okay, that's all signed up. I'm going to open the floor, and if you think that, well, I didn't get a chance to rebut, everyone's going to get a chance to have the final word until there's no final word. I do want to say one thing because and this is not advocating for one side or the other, but it is a question I ask because there's so many different variables. And this might be an odd question to ask, but I think it's something that this committee needs to be asking themselves. If I was injured, where would I want to be injured? Would I want to be injured in Tennessee or Georgia? And because I see that, and we're bottom of that, but there are, again, the MMI, the other, and I'm sure we're going to hear about that. But it is a very big, vast. Is that a fair question? I guess is what I'm asking. Is where would if I could be injured anywhere in the United States, where would that want to be? Okay. Anybody else? Bobby Potter. Bonner says he'd like to be in Hawaii. Yeah, could we lower that again?
I'm not
Okay.
touching that.
I thought Bobby might want to use it.
Thank you all.
So, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, my name is Bobby Potter. I've been here before. It does feel like deja vu. Been here before on this issue. My role in that this time is as chairman of the Chairman's Advisory Council. That's the advisory council of about 100 folks that are stakeholders in this system appointed by the chairman of the State Board of Workers' Compensation. It's comprised of 6 committees, one of which is the Legislative Committee. For a long time, I was chairman of that committee within the Advisory Council. And for whatever dumb luck, I said I would do both. So I continue to be chairman of the Legislative Committee and have been on, and I'm now chairman of the Advisory Council. And I'd say a couple of things. One, thank you to Sarah Stottlemyre. I think she did a marvelous job setting that out. Zach, you heard from last year, and it's similar, but a lot of those factual presentations are certainly accurate. There's nothing misleading about that. There is a little bit of a we versus them that I heard from Zach that I will tell you within the Advisory Council we try to avoid. You all have plenty of we versus thems in many of your issues. We met on this issue during this session. You passed a bill that had the rate increase in it, but this topic, this issue, became part of that probably here, certainly on the Senate side, then it came back here, then there was a separate resolution. So you've heard a fair amount of this, and you continue to. I would say this about the other factors, and some of you have touched on, this is a complex system, and it's, Representative McLean, it is state-based. There is a federal workers' compensation system for federal employees, but it's sort of apples and oranges. It's run by a different entity, and it is applicable to just those employees. The other factors that are significant, and I would differ from Zach from this perspective. At least by me, I don't threaten MMI or some of these other items. They are part of the puzzle of other states. That's just part of it. And I suspect that's in a handout that you all have. I haven't
seen that and don't have it, but the duration of benefits is a critical component. The suspension mechanism of benefits is a critical component. Some have used that term here today, MMI. That's one method of doing that. And then Sarah talked about South Carolina. There are certainly others in other surrounding states. The cause of the injury, whether it is a dominant cause or whether it's the straw that broke the camel's back, is a factor in a number of states.
I know what that means, but everybody else may not. Give us an example of dominant cause.
One of the hooplas in Florida some years ago, when there was pressure built up on that system, cost pressure, one of the factors that they have passed is dominant cause. For an injury to be compensable, it needs to be the work injury needs to be the dominant cause of that. I've heard in the last few days that there may be a change in Tennessee law that it uses a different term, but it's basically the same thing. So as opposed to, as an example, you've worked 30 years and you have a degenerative back condition, but you've been over at some point and your back got considerably worse. Well, what's the dominant cause of that? It might be the 30 years, but it might be bending over as an aggravation. Right now in Georgia, the bending over as an aggravation is an injury. That's an injury. Repetitive use, carpal tunnel, was a big deal in Georgia and other states. I mean, it still exists, but particularly in the poultry industry. And some states didn't allow for that. Georgia does. So, to me, it's not a we versus them from this perspective, but clearly, I mean, you've heard from these folks, and WCCL has said often, and I kind of have the agenda through the years. Indexing is at the top of their list. Indexing is their biggest legislative priority, hence I suppose that's the reason we're here, and that's the reason maybe that you've heard this for 3 times within the period of a year. I don't disagree at all with Sarah. I don't disagree at all with my partner Stinson that wrote, this applies to this percentage of hiring employees. It doesn't have any impact on the other ones. It just doesn't. But the catch is, and one other aspect I would raise, and maybe take some disagreement. It was posed as the injured worker versus the insurers, and the insurers are making a bunch of money. This, at least in my experience, it's not been an injured worker insurer issue. It's generally the folks on the other side are business. Lots of small business, lots of big business, some of whom are involved in folks at the Capitol. But the insurer piece, I mean, they through the years they've had a seat at the table, but they don't really drive it. This is a business. So I wanted to note that, but I would suggest to you these other pieces of the puzzle, not from a threatening mechanism, but the fact that other states that index have these other parts of their system. They may be attributes, they may be negatives from the standpoint of the claimant lawyers here, but they include some versions of MMI. Workable subrogation is a big deal. Georgia's subrogation, if it were listed by those involved in subrogation, would say, we're dead last. There was a guy that worked subrogation nationwide 4 or 5 years ago here, said Georgia is 50th. You just can't really do subrogation in the workers' compensation arena. Some of it you can, but it's very difficult. And just a quick blurb on that. That would be if Representative Kirby's got a truck going down the road or a vehicle going down the road, his employees are injured in a wreck, clearly caused by someone else. In some states, he can recover his benefits from the party who is at fault. It's virtually impossible in Georgia to do that between the full and complete compensation language and the manner in which our appellate courts have interpreted that. So that's an item. Duration, clearly an item. I've mentioned dominant cause. Attorney fees are, the manner in which attorney fees are paid are quite different in some other states and these surrounding states. I don't suggest any change there. I'm not threatening any change there. I think ours is fine, but clearly it's different in other states and less favorable to the folks that are sitting here. And the truth is, to me, in this discussion, lawyer advertising is part of this complexity. And some of the brethren on this side of the aisle make it very difficult for them to have rational discussions about things. When you're talking about the example of the injured worker that can just barely make it, but you're driving down I-85 and you see, call me, big settlement. Next stop, big settlement. There's a bunch of them, of course, but it is not, that thought process is not, how do we make this work to pay this injured worker enough to make it on a temporary basis, pay the medical, get this person back to work. That's kind of a different experience than call me and hit the jackpot. So that is part of this conversation that makes it difficult. Chairman Werkheiser, if you were injured, where would you want to be injured? It's an interesting question, and it might be Georgia in some cases. It could be Florida. Hawaii is not a bad option. I don't know what their workers' compensation case is, but you could rest better there. But this would be an example of why it's just not an easy answer. In Florida, your weekly benefit would be considerably higher. It may have changed, but what I've got right now is $1,099. The duration of that is 104 weeks. In Georgia, it's less, but it's for 400 weeks, possibly if it's catastrophic, for a lifetime. There's a radio show on WSB where there's a would you rather thing every afternoon, and that will be the question. Would you rather have higher benefits for a shorter period of time or lesser benefits for a higher period of time? It's kind of an unanswerable question based on the nature of the injury. One other item I just would touch on, because Representative Kirby raised it, is there a difference between CAT and non-CAT, and how do we deal with that? Or do we? Is there differentiation? I appreciate Sarah's involvement in this system. I appreciate the manner in which she has done that. She's indicated she's been doing it for 15 years, which is terrific, and I hope in 15 more years she can say, I've been doing this for 30 years. I've been involved in this for 45 years. So there's nothing good or bad about that other than there's a lot of scar tissue associated with some of these issues that have developed over time and some of these arguments that have occurred over time and the development of catastrophic versus non-catastrophic. And just as an anecdote, I would, and y'all may not know this, but some years ago when the comp rate was 225, there was a member of the business community, well respected, that said, what if we double it for those that are truly injured, the really injured workers? Cat and non-cat was not defined then. What if we do that? And it was not a political game. I think he was trying to do the right thing. And it was a very respected, no longer with us, trial lawyer on the claimant side that said you can't do that. If you do that, you would put me, the claimant lawyer, in the position of saying every case is this case. I can go back to the billboard stuff, but everybody would have that kind of ethical obligation to push that at that maximum rate. Later, there was this differentiation between catastrophic and non-catastrophic. Social Security got involved in that to borrow some of that language from that. That's sort of how some of that history developed. So, to put some of these things in perspective, those are my comments. I would close by this. I was involved in this stuff in 91 and 92. Didn't really want to be. I don't even think I was on the advisory council then, and it might have been quite different. But after that, there was a presentation to a bunch of folks and a panel about what just happened. And would y'all explain to us, this is in the business community, but would y'all explain to us what is in this bill? And then a question was posed about, well, what's the biggest issue in workers' compensation at that time, post that bill? And I was the youngest guy and called on first, so I was kind of worried about the answer. Chairman Oxendine was the chairman at that time, but I said, to me and my experience at that time, so that was probably, I started in 77, so that's 15, 16, 17 years. I said, duration is the biggest issue. Duration of benefits, and that is somebody's on benefits and it's the type of person that doesn't necessarily want to get back to work. Clearly not everyone. The goal is temporary total, is supplemental income or income while somebody recovers, full medical, 100% of medical, get somebody back to work. Obviously, every case is not like that. That duration is still an issue. It's different in other states than it is in Georgia. But we have a balance. This part of the puzzle has us at the lowest or close to the lowest rate on a weekly basis. We're clearly not from the standpoint of duration. And those things kind of tend to balance out. I said that was the last thing, but I wanted to mention one other thing. To validate what Sarah had indicated, what Zach had indicated, last year, because I indicated it, I was sitting here, standing here, saying the advisory council at a meeting and the legislative committee of the advisory council recommended the $100 increase. And I still do. I wish it had happened that way. And I still recommend the catch-up for this coming year. And my goal, we've got a meeting in a couple of weeks and then another in October. And I've talked to some folks beforehand on both sides of the aisle. My recommendation, my personal recommendation would be to make the bump and do a catch-up. It's going to be kind of a round number, but that's my recommendation. Not as a trade of all these other things that we've talked about, but if we get into indexing, there's going to be discussions of trade and what would work better and what would work not. The reason the advisory council is named advisory council is it at the end of the day, it advises. And who does it advise? Sometimes you all ask, and it advises you all, but it's advisory to the State Board of Workers' Compensation. That begins that process legislatively. There's a lot of other things that don't go through the legislative process. They can make changes that enhance the system, work better where they've got some things that don't work from whatever it is, a self-insurance standpoint or rulemaking standpoint, procedural standpoint. They can make some of those changes. Those that require legislative changes, however, that's brought by the agency, and the agency deals with what agencies deal with. Generally, if they're appointed, they deal with the governor and the governor's staff. So that was the $100 recommendation, which I stick by and wish it had happened. It didn't end up that way at the end of the day. The advisory council recommended it. I think it was a solid recommendation, and I would stand by that. So those are my comments.
You've got a couple of questions, Representative Kirby?
You didn't have to start with me. I want to hear from others first.
I can change it. I was going by how they lit up.
I figured they can probably ask some of the same. And of course, from my friend Bobby, nothing but friendly questions. Why, I don't remember, I remember the discussion, but why did we drop it $50 from what the advisory council wanted originally? Do you recall why we did that? Why that was done?
It wasn't dropped. They recommended $100.
But how did it end up at 50? How did that?
Between the agency and the governor
just one of those legislative things, right? Okay.
I think the chairman has probably appropriately responded to that.
All right. Second question, and you may not know this. In Georgia, of course, we talk about exclusive remedy income. Is that universal in all 50 states or not? Do you know? Or
is exclusive remedy? Mm-hmm. At the risk of not knowing what every state is, I would say generally yes.
Okay. And you talking about being around for 45 years. We started off talking about why did we get this system that we have. Do you have any recollection? I mean, research looks like we started off at 2/3 of the median income, but we did it as a number. And do you have any reason why it was done that way when it started?
Not. Here's my guess, and
Okay.
it would be a guess. So
that's fine.
45 years is still less than half the time this system has been in place. It started in Georgia in 1920. And so the 100th anniversary was a couple of years ago, but what happened then, of course, was COVID. So there was going to be a 100th celebration, and ultimately I was asked to participate in a Zoom video, something or other, looking back at the history of workers' compensation. It probably would have been borrowed from New York. New York was one of the first states in the country that implemented that system, and I think that was borrowed from Europe. But it developed early, and the dollar benefits were today astonishingly low. Of course, it's all relative, but at some point it was $12, and then it was $16. Ashley had mentioned taking things into account that occur. COVID obviously was something that occurred that affected everybody, but it certainly affected business in a very big way when businesses were ordered to be closed. She mentioned war or the threat of war. We haven't felt that way in the United States so much, but maybe we're feeling it now with the supply chain issues and all that have an effect on business. But during those war years, what I generally refer to in World War II, that benefit stayed the same. It's either 5 or 6 years. It stayed the same because of conditions unrelated to the workers' compensation system.
Final question. NCCI, I think we're in the top 10 highest claims experience modifiers in the country. Is that about right? 9th, I think, last I looked. What, you got an opinion on why our modifier is so high compared to other states? And I can look at the board guys too. I thought they
Yeah,
might. Is that about right where we are? It's about 9th highest, I think? I'll check on that. Okay,
yeah, I don't know the answer to that.
all right.
I would say also anecdotally that I'd heard from a big business that you all would recognize that has outlets in Florida and outlets in Georgia, and for whatever reason, as this person tells me, their claims experience is higher in Georgia than Florida. I don't know what to make of that, other than it's not all about the dollar benefits.
Thank you.
Representative Park.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Potter, I always appreciate the wisdom based on your experience, which you impart. I do have a few questions, which I hope we can discuss and just have a dialogue, really. And I do apologize. I'll do what I can to ask some friendly questions, but if they don't come across friendly, apologies. So first off, when it comes to all the statements on this Georgia business organizations against indexing, would you essentially agree with all of these statements included by these business associations, the ACCG and GMA?
So what I indicated a few minutes ago, and I was tardy, I got involved in school traffic, but I don't have that. I saw something, I don't know, several weeks ago that had some bullet points, but I don't think it is that, where signatures are collected.
So just so that I could get a better understanding of both sides of this issue, because clearly workers' comp is a complex system, but at least when it comes to indexing, the issue seems, at least in my mind, relatively straightforward and simple. One, if it's simply a matter of codifying a gentleman's agreement, which would still keep Georgia at the very bottom in the nation as to what injured workers are paid. But one of the claims that are stated in this document, again, supported by a good number of businesses, including ACCG and GMA, Georgia Power, Wellstar, is that it can undermine business attraction in which, Georgia being the top state for doing business 8 years in a row. Would it be your assertion that paying workers, injured workers, the lowest in the nation is a necessary element to be the number one state in which to do business?
That is a fascinating, semi-non-friendly question.
Sorry.
My answer, I suppose, is this. And I don't live in that world where state agencies in Georgia are their job is to attract business and bring whatever it is. Rivian's the big deal right now, but there are ample others. I would guess in their presentation, and I don't know, they would, relative to workers' compensation, maybe the piece of that puzzle is we have a solid, stable workers' compensation system. I would guess they would not advertise that we pay the lowest rate in the country, or one of them, and they probably don't advertise that our benefits are much longer than our state to the south. It is for the attraction of business. It would be, do you have a solid system to determine how injured workers are compensated and for how long? And I think we do.
Well, I think there's certainly a bipartisan objective to Georgia to continue to be a great place for businesses to come. Based on some of the information that the Georgia Chamber of Commerce has mentioned, in which there are 460,000 open positions in the state, with 150,000 Georgians unemployed, in which we clearly need to attract more workers to make sure that businesses who are investing billions of dollars in this state have the people to do those jobs. I think Chairman Werkheiser makes an excellent point, in which where do workers want to go, especially if they know that in Georgia, whether it's by word of mouth or by experience of other workers, know that they're not going to be properly compensated, particularly when injured. So, I think at least as to that argument, I would certainly like a better understanding from the business community as to, whether or not they are asserting that having injured workers paid the least in the nation is a necessary element for Georgia to remain the number one state in which to do business. Because I think in the long run, it undermines the ability for businesses to move here, especially if they can't attract the workforce necessary to recoup their investment that they're making. Please.
So I suppose, well, let me say two things about that. The first piece, relative to the least in the nation, then you focus on that maximum rate that applies to 20%, 25% of our workers and not the rest of them. And the other piece is, if you just zero in on that, which has been the case for WCCL for some time, and saying we're all about indexing in that piece of that, then you miss the duration part. Going back to Florida, it's $1,000, but it's for 2 years. Georgia, less than that, $725, it's for at least 8 years. So which would you want? Depends on whether you're going to be out of work for 2 years or 6 years. So it's not necessarily, we're not necessarily at the bottom.
I think one thing that would be helpful, especially given the complexity of the workers' comp system, would be if there were any quantitative measures that take a comprehensive perspective that includes, in terms of a number, kind of what injured workers in Georgia are making for a certain period of length compared to other injured workers in other states. Because if simply focusing on index is in any way misleading and it's not capturing the entire picture, that would certainly be helpful information to members of this committee and as well as the legislature in making a decision as to move forward. I do think that one of the questions that Vice Chair Kirby had asked earlier in this committee meeting, which was, why, what reason or why, how does the current system benefit Georgia, right? What's the reason or justification for continuing and perpetuating the existing system? I still haven't necessarily heard a good reason as to why that's the best. And again, looking at this list of bulleted points, even when it comes to eliminating uncertainty, my understanding is that businesses want certainty as to how much workers are getting paid, and by simply indexing how much an injured worker make, does that not provide greater certainty for both employers and injured workers as we move forward? That would otherwise be an added benefit.
That can certainly be an argument if one were building a 5-year or 10-year plan. You might could project that.
I guess asked another way, one of the things it says here is that Georgia's avoided legislative chaos in workers' comp. That's a hallmark of other jurisdictions which have indexing. Again, if we're simply looking at indexing, I think a holistic perspective and what those other issues are would help inform our understanding of whether or not that's actually true. That's in my mind.
I don't know if there's chaos in 49 or 48 other states. Sounds like Indiana does something a little different. I am confident there was, if not chaos, there was an upheaval in the Florida system about a decade ago with some fairly draconian measures that favored business and did not favor injured workers and did not favor attorneys for injured workers. One of the things that I think the advisory council does is, at least attempts to do, is to try to keep pressure building up from one side or the other where some upheaval occurs. And that upheaval occurred in 91 and 92 that really infected and affected the legislature a good bit. And it's, for the most part, been avoided since then. Maybe that's the answer. The other piece I would say, relative to the things that you're reading from, all of my time involved in this process has been on the defense side. I'm just sort of a stable kind of person. I went to work at Swift, Curry, McGee and Hires when there were 30 lawyers, and that was, in 1977. I've been there the whole time. I've probably had 2 claimant cases while I was there, but I'm on the defense side. So I've done that. I represent employers and insurers. And it's likely that I would personally agree with a fair amount of what you have read from. But when Chairman Vinson asked me to chair the advisory council, it puts me in this role of trying to balance things out and not be an advocate for one side or the other, and hear from Rebecca and Sarah and Zach and Robert in one ear, and and you all will hear it, and from business folks on the other side with differing viewpoints. And that committee tries to balance some of those things out, and also tries to balance out what folks at the State Board of Workers' Compensation, their judges, their staff people say, this has become a problem for us, whatever it is. And a number of times over the years, they have raised something and it's been fixed in that manner without having to present it first here.
So, Mr. Potter, especially based on prior testimony, I think there's certainly bipartisan support on this committee for the advisory committee and the good work that it's done, not just to help ensure that balance on both sides, but would it be your assertion then that simply going to automatic indexing would in any way undermine the function or ability for the advisory committee to function as we move forward, if that was the decision of this legislature?
You know, not a lot of things are the end of the world, but I would say when Ashley testified and presented that, and whatever you have with so many signatures, and because at least as I heard it from time constraints, there would have been more, but there's not many, there would be significant opposition to indexing. We'll feel it in the advisory council. You all will feel it here. So it's, for whatever reason, it's more of a hypercharged issue, maybe than it should be, but it is. It becomes a political issue, and for all the reasons that the chairman referenced about the difference, and the timetable from advisory council to the board to the legislature through the governor's office, there's a lot of permutations that are involved in that.
At least based on my experience on this committee, oftentimes I think, especially under the leadership of Chairman Werkheiser, there's been a very intentional effort to have a balance between labor and industry, employers and employees. And, again, I'm just still having a difficult time understanding why this is such a controversial issue for employers when it's simply indexing the TTD benefit, which would keep the state of Georgia still at the very bottom, and if there's nominal or marginal cost to insurance costs, and I still haven't heard any reason why, that or any good reasons that justify not indexing and remaining an outlier that keeps us not just at the bottom but the very bottom. So certainly I think from members of our business community and from employers, any additional information that y'all can provide to me would be greatly appreciated if I'm missing something. But if it's a matter of just politics because you don't want something, that's one thing. But if it's a matter of trying to ensure that injured workers in this state are, again, receiving the benefits that they're otherwise entitled to in a fair manner, that would still keep them at the bottom of the state in this country. Again, I think if y'all could help me better understand that dynamic, I think I'd appreciate that.
So thank you for that. That maybe at the risk of repeating myself, you indicated that the bottom and the very bottom a couple of times there, and that is of one element of the workers' compensation system.
Let me just interject there because in comparison, I kind of cringe when I hear the bottom two. So in Georgia, in Florida, your max would be $24,000 that you receive. In Georgia, it would be $70,000. So that's pretty significant. Just so if you stack the chips there, it puts pretty high. But again, it's one piece of the puzzle. It's very difficult. So
I think those numbers would be very helpful. Right. If an injured worker in Florida is making a third of what an injured worker, taking all factors into consideration in Georgia, it'd be nice to have some quantifiable data as we're trying to determine what the best public policy is for both employers and employees as we move forward. Thank you, Mr. Potter.
Yes, sir.
Okay, I think Representative McLean was next.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You know, I guess you've been on so long, Ms. Potter, I've almost forgot, but I did want to say thanks very much because I was concerned that I kind of thought federal had something too, even though they're apples and oranges. I did figure that they had something that was comparable too. I guess optics is what got me, and I said the optics was when Zach showed that we're on the bottom. That, you know, that's what we look at, you know, what a lot of people look at, and I didn't want you looking at that all while you were doing your presentation, because I don't think you would have been thinking about your presentation looking at the optics. That's just me talking as a football player, you know. But my question is,
Thank you.
is that I didn't hear a reason, and I can hear the CTE questions now. No, just kidding. You know, I heard you kept on saying political. So, do you think that if it was indexed, that the politics would be out of this? It wouldn't be politicized at all? I mean, I guess that's a question.
Thank you. I think it's a good question. I think if indexing passed and overcame the political hurdle, the political infighting would shift to another of these categories if it was not included in indexing, particularly duration of benefits or subrogation, allowing an employee to recapture what they paid out by the at-fault driver in the car wreck. That brings in a whole different can of worms and different folks, but it would not make the politics go away.
Follow up. I guess what I'm trying to get at is, I guess what the question I really want to ask: what does anyone think that the percentage should be? I mean, you know, should it be? I mean, is the word indexing, is that the word that's probably hurting a lot of people? Could we just say that we set it at 68% instead of calling it indexing, and just say 68% or 69%, or?
I don't know. I think the catch is probably whatever the term of art is, whether it's indexing or if it's tied to, generally that's where indexing comes from. It's tied to some index or some formula. So it's going to go up periodically, notwithstanding whatever is going on else in the world. I'm not sure it would help to change the name.
Wow. Well, Mr. Chairman, I'm just going to tell you, you asked the question, where would you want to get hurt in the world? Nowhere. I won't be hurt nowhere in the world, okay? Injured nowhere, just period, okay?
All right, thanks for your patience. Representative Kennedy.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Potter, for being here. So if I recollect, $100 weekly increase was recommended by the committee. What showed up in the form of the bill was $50. We tried to amend it so that there would be the other $50 step up just a year later to get to $100, but that was resisted even then. So can you explain that?
I can explain my recommendation,
Okay.
which is what it was. I know of the resistance on one side, and I know of the push on the other side. Just because I've been involved with you all for a long time. So, and some of the things, Representative Kidder, and some of the things Representative Park, that are decided in committee, and I don't understand it either. And some of the issues that are decided for political reasons, I don't understand some of those. This would have been a political pushback, I think.
Okay. One more observation is the Mental Health Parity Act passed legislation, and we were abysmally low in the nation in terms of mental health access and treatment, dead last by some metrics. And the insurance companies pushed back on that bill as well. But we passed it. We had the political will because it was the right thing to do. So sometimes you have to just override the pushback from the insurance companies to do what's best for Georgians.
So that didn't sound like a question, but I'll.
It was an observation.
But I'll, let me just respond.
Is it not true?
Yeah.
What's that?
Can't do comparisons.
That's right. So in that world, that's the health insurance world, which is entirely different than property and casualty. And sometimes insurance is lumped in one category, like it's all run out of a building in New York. And I would again say this really isn't an issue on one side driven by workers' compensation insurers. At least that's not been my experience at all.
Okay.
It's more it's more about business. And I was honestly delighted to see that bill pass. I mean, clearly it did not pass in one session. It did. I mean, every bill passes in one session, but that conversation has been going on a long time.
Sure. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Okay, that's the speakers and the questions. Anybody else? We have the hand raised. Okay, come on up, Robert. Anybody else? Judge, you were gonna, okay, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I'm Robert Bourne. I practice workers' compensation law in Cumming, Georgia, and I'm speaking on behalf today of Georgia Injured Workers Association. If you know what the speed limit is, you set it on cruise control, and you forget about it. There's a lot of things we have disagreement about. We talk about comprehensive reform here, which I'm going to address that in a second. But this is one thing we have agreement on, 66 2/3, but we continuously miss the mark. That's a systemic problem, but it's easily fixed, okay? What you're not hearing when we say let's fix that problem is a good reason why we shouldn't fix it. It's kind of like we know what the speed limit is. We insist we go the speed limit, and the response we get from the other side is, hey, we're not just going to give you a ticket if you insist on going the speed limit. We want to do draconian reform. Hey, I'm going to suggest to you there's only one reason why you would do reform in Georgia on the workers' comp system, and that's because businesses are saying, we don't want to come to Georgia because your system's messed up. That ain't even remotely close to the case here. Let's talk about, MMI. First of all, you're comparing apples to oranges. Those states that have MMI, they have much higher comp rates. And it's not just cut off, it's just an invitation for more litigation. They have maximum comp rates for the impairment rating, 100%. Georgia's not that. Georgia was the first state in the nation to do away with lifetime medical benefits. We capped the medical benefits. We were the first to do 104 as a 2/3 reduction, then another 2/3 reduction. I don't know if you realize this, but if you're a single individual and you die on the job and you have no children and no spouse, your family gets absolutely nothing. And that's true even if the employer was grossly or willfully misconduct, you get nothing. So there's a lot of gross injustices on both sides. The advisory council has a list every year, and we go through it, and we argue about these things. But on this one issue, we do have agreement. It's 66 2/3, but we invariably miss the mark. There's no reason for that. We wouldn't be up here except this is a continuing problem, and it's going to be a problem this year too. Why? Because they're going to come up and say, well, we had an agreement, it's $100, so we want to give you $50 this year. But guess what? In 2021, the wages have gone up. So the comp rate, they're going to want to raise it to $775. And our response is going to be, it should be 66 2/3, which would raise it to $810. And I promise you, there's not going to be an agreement on that, and we're going to be right back up here again because If you agree it's 66 and 2/3, then make it 66 and 2/3, and we can forget about all this stuff. But I appreciate y'all considering this issue. It's an important issue. It hasn't gone away, and it continues to be a problem, and it can be fixed. Unless there's any questions.
No, sir. Thank you very much.
All right, nobody else can talk.
Miss,
That's all right.
it was suggested, chairman, judge, many titles. Introduce the folks that are with you.
So, yes, my name is Ben Vinson. I'm the chairman and chief appellate judge at the State Board of Workers' Compensation. So, this means that I have a dual role. In terms of the chairman, I'm in charge of the administration of a state agency of about 140 employees, and I'm also in charge of our regulation and kind of our policy for the state agency, and I interact with the General Assembly and with the governor's office on that. I'm also a judge. So we're the appellate division. There are 3 judges on the appellate division. Judge Frank McKay and Judge Nira Ball are here, and then myself. So whenever a case goes in front of, originates in front of our ALJs, our trial court level, and if somebody wants to appeal, then they appeal to us. So every day we are talking about comp, we're looking at cases, we're deciding what to do, but then particularly as the chairman, then I have to turn around and also talk to all the stakeholders that are here about policy. Our executive director, Delise Brooks, is here as well, and she regulates and manages the agency. So lots of different issues that emerge, lots of the things that you've heard today, she looks at them every day because we have 11 different divisions, lots of people, about 10 or 12 people on each of those divisions within the agency, and we handle comp issues all day long. The idea is, over 100,000 claims a year come through the Georgia system, and the issue is how do you get the money from employers and insurers across the divide to the injured workers? And the numbers change, but it's between $1 billion and $2 billion. Right now, I think it's around $1.5 billion crosses that threshold each and every year. And our job is to regulate that and make sure it works efficiently. So I will begin with a few things. And as a judge, I always sit and I listen to both sides, and it's great. And I noticed a couple of comments from the claimants bar about, in front of us, you get to go first, then you also get to go last. So you have a rebuttal. And so I'm hoping to dominate the remainder of this time and allow no rebuttal. But seriously, I am here for a few reasons, and I'll tell you why I'm not here. I'm not here to state a position on indexing, to tell you whether I'm in favor of it or opposed to it. What I'm here to do is listen to the stakeholders that work in comp every day, to hear the arguments from the claimants bar, to hear the arguments from the employers and the insurers, to hear your questions and to figure out what's going on with this issue and how it fits in. So to begin kind of with Chairman Werkheiser's opening comments, that's what I do as a judge, and that's what I'll do here. I'll use that discretion. I'll listen. And then I will say this, the law is what it is right now, and our rules are what they are right now. So you kind of have to, in our cases, one side has the burden of proof. So in this instance, there's one party that wants to make a change, one party that doesn't want to make a change. So we have to kind of go in there and talk about why would we change what we have now, which leads me, Representative Kirby, your original question, why do we do it the way we do it, and why don't we do it differently? And that's kind of like, why is the United States of America a democracy? All right, so there's alternatives. Well, there you go, a constitutional republic. There you go. See, you've already corrected me. Fantastic, and I'll make a note of that and not say that next time. Exactly. Great point. So no, but it's true. So start there. All right, there are a bunch of different ways to do it. That's the whole idea. It's a republic. There are 50 states. There are 50 different workers' comp systems. So Georgia does it the way Georgia does it because we're Georgia. And there's a long history of, I mean, let me say it this way. Indexing is a legitimate topic of discussion in workers' comp. In fact, it's been at the top of WCCL's priority list for 20 years. It is talked about every single year. Advisory Council has wrestled with it. I came onto the board in 2017, became the chairman last year. I've wrestled with it. I'm confronted with it. It's a legitimate topic of discussion. The question is, let's talk about the facts and let's figure out what the facts are, and then let's apply it in this context of policy. You know, what would we do and how would we do it? So what I want to do here today is certainly answer any of your questions, and I made notes as I went through. Several of your questions were answered, I thought, but I'm happy to go back and clarify those. But I did want to start by talking too about numbers. So Representative Kirby, you posed several questions, and several of the speakers here today have talked about the numbers. So this can get complicated, and it is a numbers game, and you have to crunch those numbers. You have to figure out what to do. So I'm happy to go through. I'll try to not do it in a way that confuses everything, but I'm happy to go back through those numbers. I'm also happy to talk about one thing that has been said many times, and I do want to point this out as you know, this body and the Senate and the governor's office and the State Board of Workers' Compensation and the Advisory Council, you know, we have to look at the whole. So if the claimant's bar wants to pick out max TTD rate and show you where we rank, the business community can pick out a stat and show you where you rank. There are dozens of factors that go into what it means to be injured in Georgia and then how much money you might get. It's very complicated, and a lot of times it ends up in litigation. So for instance, and I'll try to make it as simple as I can. You know, Bobby Potter mentioned duration. I mean, I think that's the most simple thing, is a stat is only as meaningful as that stat stands alone. So to say that in Georgia we don't pay our injured workers very much, or we're last in the nation and we do this and that, it completely ignores the fact that you have to run a dozen calculations to figure out what actually happens. And I can share with the committee after this, I can send you documentation, or I can just talk about it quickly and try to explain it. There are studies that have been done by outside organizations, not us, not one of our stakeholder groups, research institute organizations. And what they would say is, over the last several years, I've seen these studies on an annual basis. They look at it more, not just what is the rate, but they would say, how much does a claim cost in Georgia? So if you're an employer insurer, the rate doesn't really matter if you only have to pay that rate for a week. It would matter if you had to pay it for 100 weeks or 200 or 400. You always have to take another factor into account to figure out what's actually happening. So if you look at it that way, we're not last in the nation. We're kind of in the middle. And I'll share that with you, and I'll show you that stat. And part of this, what I want to do today is to say to you, this is a complicated issue. I'm happy to take your questions, go research them, and then come back to you and show you, you know, let's take 10 factors instead of just one. Run that number. Compare Georgia to Florida. All right, we can do that. Compare Georgia to Alabama. Whatever you want us to do, I'm here as a resource, and I'm happy to help you, to show you that. I made notes as I went along, and I can walk through the questions that were posed. I think I'll talk about a couple of the important things in terms of me personally. So I was at the center, and I was involved in the $100 versus $50 decision over the past year. And what it comes down to is it comes down to math. So if we look, first and foremost, elementary school math, if part of the people that are arguing at me want 0 and part want 100, I go with 50. I split the difference, essentially. That was my recommendation, was Advisory Council debated Advisory Council showed me that the numbers were $1,149 per week is the state average weekly wage. Therefore, the max TT rate should have been $766. We were currently at $675. So if you did a $100 increase, and part of it is I want you to understand the timeline. So there's at least a year delay on the DOL numbers that come out. So we don't find out what the state average weekly wage is for 2020 until almost through the end of 2021. So the numbers that we were looking at in the fall of 21 were the 2020 numbers. So that's the 1149. 766 is your goal. That's your 2/3. And the current rate was 675. So the question is, Advisory Council says we need to catch up. So Advisory Council gave me a recommendation of $100. I then started the process of coming and talking to Chairman Werkheiser, talking to the governor's office, talking to the Senate, talking to everybody who's going to be involved in a very large, complicated, multi-party process. And I also heard from Advisory Council that there's you either do it 100 at once or you do it 50-50. So based on, and I want to say it this way, based on we were within 2 years of the beginning of the pandemic in October of 2021 and leading into January of 2022. So I factored in pandemic, I factored in what businesses and employers are talking about. I factored in labor shortages. I factored in a potential of an economic downturn coming, factored in inflation. There's lots of things that have to go into it. Bottom line is that we pushed forward with a $50 increase, and the intention is and was to push for 50. But as Mr. Bourne just pointed out, those numbers are changed. So now we do know the 2021 number. It's 1216. So that changes the math. Okay, fine. You just change the math, rerun the numbers, come back, try to move it forward. So I just wanted you to know there's a delay of the number, and you have to look at it, and you have to figure out, and then you balance everything, and then you try to keep it. I do want to point out stats are interesting things, and you can use them how you want to. So if you were to say to me, why do we not index in Georgia? I've got a couple of different philosophical answers, but the pure math number would be, we don't talk about a 59% this, or what you do is you say, if 2/3 is supposed to be the payment that an injured worker gets in Georgia, which they get under the cap, right? So when you're over the cap, how do we do it? So the number that we were looking at that we currently should be held to is the goal would be $766. The rate right now is $725. That is 95%. So the 725 is a 95% accomplishment of the goal. So regardless of stats here, stats there, this percentage versus 66, whatever, I mean, in terms of the board, the advisory council, the General Assembly, and the governor, as of this past session, we're at 95%. Now, sure, you're 5% short of your 100% goal. And I'm not here to tell you that we don't have a 100% goal. We do. And my intention is to come back and hit that. But I just wanted you to think about it that way. 725 is 95% of 766. And had we done the 100 instead of the 50, it would be 101%. So I did hear a few things today about if we had done 100 instead, we wouldn't be talking here today. But I'm happy to be here and talk about it because it's a legitimate topic of discussion, and I want to answer all your questions. Mr. Chairman, I will try to help you understand and the committee to understand. We heard about dominant cause, and I want to kind of open that topic up. I can try to answer questions on that if you need clarification on it, why it came up or what it means, how it works in other states. I'm not an expert on other states, but I can kind of talk about that issue and what it is. But the bottom line is, dominant cause is the flip side of an aggravation injury. And I think you heard it a little bit today. I think Mr. Potter commented on it. But the idea would be, in Florida, if if you're a football player in high school and you blow your knee out, and then a few years later you twist it on the job site, there's a way in Florida for them to say you don't really get comp for the knee because the knee is related to the football injury. That's the dominant cause of that. Whereas in Georgia, we have aggravation injuries. So in Georgia, and we hear these cases every day where we might say, yeah, but if the job site injury is still causing an aggravation of even that old injury that's now more complicated than it was, whatever, employers and insurers in Georgia still pay for that. So that's just a quick point on dominant cause, and I can get into that if you want me to. And then MMI is kind of the same way. Maximum medical improvement would be, and this is something that I kind of want to figure out how to say this. If you just take indexing and then take MMI, indexing is the auto feature of the max comp rate. I mean, MMI could either be what we have here in Georgia, which is you have to show it and you have to come in front of a judge, you have to prove your case, or it can be auto. That's the difference. The difference is there are some states where it is much easier for an employer or insurer to look at a doctor's opinion or a doctor note and then unilaterally cut somebody off and do something that would taper off injured worker benefits. Whereas in Georgia, you might have to come in front of a judge to get it done. So it's kind of there's a same kind of issue. There's just a different way to do it. Sometimes it's automatic. Sometimes it requires a judicial opinion. I can either walk through more of the questions that you had, or I can stop and just find out if there are any questions that you want to pose to me right now. And most importantly, the Advisory Council Legislative Committee meets on Monday. So we have our annual conference coming up on Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday. 600 people in the workers' comp industry will come together and we'll talk about issues, important issues, and what's going on. Legislative Committee of Advisory Council will meet, so we can take what we've heard here today. We'll go immediately into that. It has representatives from all the groups that you've heard from here today. We can talk about that. And then we have Advisory Council set in October, and we'll talk about it there too. And I'm happy to take either written questions, like a follow-up series of questions that this committee might have, come back to you with answers, or I can just let you know that we will, of course, continue the discussion going into the fall. Thank you.
Okay, Representative Park.
Thank you, Chairman Werkheiser. Judge Vinson, of course, thank you for your service, certainly going back to 2017. A few questions, if you don't mind. And,
sure.
And I follow up with a request for additional information as well toward the end. But to begin with, you said that you weren't here to state a position on indexing. Does that imply that the governor also does not yet have a position on indexing?
You'll have to ask him that.
So as chairman of the State Workers' Comp Board, were you appointed by the governor?
I was.
And so do you represent the governor as chair of the State Workers Board of Compensation?
So the way to properly explain that is that I haven't talked to the governor directly about indexing, and he hasn't told me that he feels one way or the other, which also informs why I don't feel one way or the other. That would be something that would come out in the process.
Thank you.
Into the fall, governor asks all state agencies to propose legislation, and then governor will look with his legislative staff and figure out what they're going to endorse, push for. So it hasn't come up yet.
Thank you. And so I will assume that despite the opposition from a lot of these business organizations, the governor is still contemplating whether or not he's in favor or against indexing in the state of Georgia.
I would think that he would be open to it.
Thank you. So going back to the math, I think a comprehensive assessment taking into consideration all these various factors would be helpful in making a determination to really assess where Georgia stands when it comes to how much injured workers are getting paid, because I think that may be a factor that should be considered when we're looking at how to best address Georgia's workforce shortage, which is certainly a national and global challenge, but certainly if that's an area in which we can make a little bit of progress. Additional data would be helpful and would have been, I think, a lot more helpful as opposed to simply bullet points that in part don't seem to be entirely true, certainly when it comes to automatic increases, which I think is a third bullet point here, when indexing, at least my understanding of it would be that the amount goes down in the event of an economic downturn or a recession. So again, taking into consideration all of the main factors, getting a better understanding of how much injured workers are receiving and where that ranks compared to other states, I think would be very helpful.
Okay.
Regarding the math, you said that 725 is 95% of the goal of 66%, which at least as to indexing would still, correct me if I'm wrong, put us at one of the lowest rates, at least as to indexing in the nation. Is that correct?
So yes, if you just look at the pure max TTD rate, then those numbers don't lie. You can compare state to state, but that's just one factor.
Okay. And then going back to this back and forth about the $100 versus $50, and I do think, frankly, it's unfortunate that we're having this conversation, frankly speaking, just because, at least based on my understanding of this issue so far, indexing seems common sense. I certainly don't know all the other factors, but I think, again, having the data to see the bigger picture would be helpful. But you mentioned that $50 was essentially splitting the difference. Does that mean or imply that employers wanted a 0% increase rather than the agreed upon 2/3 of the gentleman or woman's agreement?
So I think that's a difference between looking at the overall business community in Georgia and thinking about, sure, I mean, if you ask a lot of employer insurers, do you want an increase? The answer is no, right? They would rather it stay what it is. They would say it's high enough, you get enough. But that's the inherent struggle between labor and business. And that's why on advisory council, a lot of the people come together and you have a lessening of that influence. And that's why, I mean, advisory council certainly came back to me and said, we recommend this is what you need to do. It needs to be $100. My approach was to do it 50-50 instead of 100 and 0.
And I certainly understand that from an employer's perspective and focusing on the profit margin, but certainly from a worker's perspective, where the objective, or at least the stated objective of the advisory committee as well as this body, is to find that appropriate balance between employees and employers. Again, I think indexing would be more of a solution to ensuring that this is an issue that continues to go back and forth, especially if it's simply tied to what a worker's wage is at the time of injury. Last question, if I may. So you said that there was a delay in numbers where indexing does not take into, or that the amount that the advisory board considers doesn't take into consideration all the various factors. Is indexing a more flexible approach that's more adaptive, that kind of takes into all those factors, or is it just, simply based on one data point rather than missing, again, other factors?
Representative Park, thank you for the question. It leads me to something that I've been thinking about for quite some time, and I made notes about today. It's easy to say indexing, but what does that really mean? What would the bill actually say? Would the bill dictate that the State Board of Workers' Comp or the chairman look at DOL numbers from the prior year and then run some type of calculation? Would it say that the DOL sends a report to the governor's office and then the calculation is done there? Would there be some type of legislative oversight of that process to ensure what the number is? There are dozens of ways to write an indexing bill, and we don't know what that would look like. So it's difficult for me to say whether it would be more flexible or whether it would be easier. It might lead to some type of issue in the future, depending on how you would actually calculate that number. And there will be a delay. I mean, DOL doesn't publish the numbers at least until halfway through the next year. So there's going to be a delay anyway. I do want to make one, really I would call it an editorial comment back to Representative Kirby's original question. Why do we not index? Why do we do it the way we do it? The answer is control. So the current system, governor, legislature, state board, advisory council, stakeholders all get to talk about what happens. Depending on how you index, depending on how that's written, you would either be ceding that control somewhere else. I don't know whether you would peg it to a national number, peg it to DOL number, and there are ways that you'd have to unravel that. So the answer to your question is I'm not really sure because I haven't seen a draft indexing bill.
Judge, one follow-up question to that point. Would it then be possible to, create a formula for indexing that does take into consideration a multitude of factors, that is responsive, such that it could be a more objective manner of ensuring that there's fairness for both sides, as opposed to a political fight where whoever is in control ultimately sets the price, as opposed to it being an agreed upon formula in which this is at least one issue that's settled that provides certainty for both employers and employees?
Yeah, it's a kind of a philosophical question, because depending on how the bill's written, you would say it's objective, but then who gets to decide those objective factors? It may be subjective again. I mean, if you left that calculation in my hands, then I would be involved in the same way that I'm involved right now. But I see what your point. It just depends on how the bill would be written.
Well, I think your involvement in writing a bill would be incredibly important, given all of your experience and service on the Workers' Comp Board. But certainly we also have 48 different states in which we could look and see what works and what does not to help craft a bill that's more flexible and adaptive and inclusive of the various factors that ought to be taken into consideration. So I don't necessarily view it as a philosophical question, but perhaps just something that requires a little more research into what's a good public policy for the state of Georgia.
It's a great point. If there are 48 states that index, I imagine they do it 48 different ways.
Well, hopefully in that manner we could find a good way in which Georgia can index as we move forward, at least based on the information and my understanding of the issue so far. But thank you, Judge.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Representative McLean.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I guess I was going to say Representative Park just took all my questions, but Judge, I want to say thank you too very much. I did hear something you said, though. You said the 95%. We reached 95%, but it was 95% of what? I mean, when you do something like that, you have to have something in mind. And so, what was you basing that 95% on?
So great question, and I'll clarify that. This is where the numbers are flying around. So the state average weekly wage in the state of Georgia for the year 2020 was $1,149. We didn't learn that figure until halfway through 2021. Then you take a 2/3 calculation of that number.
Okay, so you used 2/3. Okay.
Correct.
All right.
That's right. So that if 1149, 2/3 of that is 766, and then what this body and the Senate and the governor and the state board and the advisory council did was to put it at 725. That 725 is 95% of 766. So in other words, if you're trying to grade where are we and what have we done, we're currently at 95%.
Okay, a follow-up now. So if we go into 2022, so we're at 1216 now, and in 2023 we're going to be further. So are we going up or are we going down?
So I think you definitely need to go up. So 1216 is the number for 2021 that was just recently released. So that is the number that we will look at going into the fall and then leading into next legislative session. And we heard this, but the 2/3 calculation on that yields 810.
Yes.
So we're currently at 725. 810 is ahead, so we're behind. And, if I stood by the 50-50 goal, well, that 50-50 goal would put us at 775, which is still not.
Which is 63%.
Exactly.
I'm helping you with the numbers.
Exactly. It's still not 810. And so, that delta, you can see it. It's $85. So if we were to push with collaboration of everybody involved, governor, General Assembly, everybody, and you wanted to knock it out and put it at 100, then you got to do $85.
So it's the goal. I just wanted to make sure that when you said your goal was, the 2/3, so it was something that you put in. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
2/3 is definitely the goal.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That exhausts all questions. Is there a final word from anybody out there? Anybody want to rebut the judge?
fine.
And risk your case
Yeah,
being heard.
at your peril. I mean,
All right, I'm gonna let the author close it out.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank everybody for being here. As we said in the opening, whether we do an index, whether we don't do an index, I don't care. I just do what's best for Georgia. The chairman asked a question about where do you want to be hurt. I don't know about that, but I do know this, having done workers' comp in over 15 states, where do I want to deal with workers' comp? I want to deal with it in Georgia. Without a doubt, the 15 states I've had to deal with comp, this is absolutely the best. It is a balanced system for employees and employers, more so than probably any other state I've ever dealt with. Some of them are very employer related, some employee related. My native state of Kentucky is one, and there's a reason for that. The what I would call the mistreatment of the coal miners, and that led to a lot of things in workers' comp. That employee just disappears from work for 2 weeks, and all of a sudden you hear from a doctor and says, "Hey, I'm taking care of him for a work-related injury," and you knew nothing about it, and that's allowed because they kind of built their own nest in some of these states, and there's a reason for it. So the advisory council and in some of the bloodbaths that we heard about back in the old days in the legislation has done a good job. I would hope we're probably going to meet again sometime in September, maybe before the advisory council meets, maybe after we hear maybe from their legislative group. Because by far we want to do what we think is right, and I think there's some things that we need to find out, some more data. It is a complex issue. The other thing I'd say about Georgia workers' comp, the best thing about it is, even though I know for especially some people that maybe haven't dealt with it a lot, if you do deal with it a lot, you can do this, and it works best without attorney involvement on either side. I mean, everybody out there may not agree with that, but if I take care of my people and they're talking to me, and my doctors on the panel are actually panel doctors, not company doctors, it works. And we get them taken care of. So we don't want to lose sight of what we're trying to do just for one issue, and there's a lot of issues that go with this. Like I guess we heard why we do it this way, control, and because we're Georgia. And so those aren't all bad, because Georgia comp is, I'll put it up against anybody out there. So hopefully we got more work to do, and thank you all for participating.
Thank you for that, and we're adjourned, and thank you for everybody coming.